Hello and welcome to the very first episode of this podcast. I'm so excited to be bringing this to everybody. Joined by my co-host here, Frank, and this is a series that we have been putting a lot of time and effort into constructing for all of you, and we hope that it's going to be really impactful. There's just so much incredible stuff happening in the world of gaming right now, and not a lot of insider information about what is going on in the world. So I think that we're going to be able to dig into some really cool insights and come up with some great perspectives to share. And Frank, of course, somebody that is one of the most public-facing figures in the mobile gaming industry. Obviously, being a game lead of Brawl Stars, would you be able to maybe give us a little introduction about yourself?
Sure, Matt. Thanks for having me. Yeah, this is really a long time coming. We've started talking about this a while ago, and I'm excited to finally kick it off. So I'm Frank. Some of you might have seen me already in our Brawl Stars update format called Brawl Talk. I've been in the mobile or in the gaming industry itself, actually, like for over 15 years now. Started working in 2005, working for Blizzard Entertainment, and then in 2014 left Blizzard behind to move to the cold north here in Finland, Helsinki, to work for Supercell, and that's where I am. And yeah, leading the Brawl Stars team since 2018.
And also one of the most public figures as far as educating, the mobile gaming community about how this industry works. So definitely one of the people that are on the short list for good Twitter follows. So if you aren't already, make sure you go ahead and hit that follow button on him, Frank_Supercell. But definitely excited to be able to, share some of your insights in these key topics that we're going to go over today.
Yeah, it's if you follow me, I can guarantee you, of course, some Brawl Stars information, gaming industry knowledge, food pictures, and pet pictures. My two dogs and my cat are featured quite a bit on my social media accounts.
Just the total package there. Absolutely. I'll give just a quick introduction about myself. I go back basically to the beginning of the mobile esports industry. I got involved in this scene pretty much with the launch of Clash Royale primarily. I was the first person to contract a professional Clash Royale team. Also, as a community organizer, ran some of the first series in that title, and also ran the first recurring live event series with a Mobile Gaming Monday series run out of the Chinese Theater in Hollywood. And so since then, I've really just tried to continue building at the forefront of mobile gaming and mobile esports, and been fortunate to connect with some great companies and colleagues. I worked as director of mobile gaming at Complexity for quite a while, led their entry into mobile and Clash Royale League. And then synced up with a couple great colleagues of mine as well at AMG, which is the largest talent management agency right now in the West for mobile gaming. And we also are a primary online events organizer for quite a few publishers. So we handle nearly all of Tencent's influencer marketing in the West for PUBG Mobile. Also ran their 2-year anniversary event. We partnered with Activision for their 1-year anniversary event, and work with a whole host of companies too. And Supercell, of course, a great, colleague of ours in the industry as well. I think we got some fun Brawl Stars stuff actually coming up pretty soon. So leaks here on the podcast.
Oh
just
my
starting
God,
off.
Matt.
So
What are you doing to me?
We'll talk about Brawl Talk later in the episode, Frank, but don't worry. Yeah, let's hop into some of these topics. As the format will go on this podcast, we'll basically each choose 2 topics that we'd like to discuss, and obviously we're going to try to pick ones that are really impactful, ones that are relevant for anybody to know about, and ones that we can really dive into and dig into some insights that are hopefully really valuable. So what are the topics that you want to start off with, Frank?
Let's talk about the Roblox IPO. I think that is a very, very hot topic this week. And it's just interesting to talk about and talk a little bit about Roblox itself, because I don't think a lot of people actually know what Roblox is.
Yeah.
If you don't have a kid around 10 years old in the US, then there's a good chance that you don't know what Roblox is.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is going to be one that we'll kick off with. After that, we'll also talk about a hot discussion right now in the League of Legends esports scene, which is their import rule, which is essentially whether or not a team that is based in a certain region can import players from other regions, or what restrictions might be around that process and the implications, of course. And then we'll close off with the final 2 topics of just looking forward this year, specifically in mobile gaming, because there are more great mobile games now than ever before, and there's a whole slew of them also due to launch this year, and so a lot of intricacies that come with that. And then we'll wrap it up as well with some regional expansion discussions, because there are some phenomenal games in existence right now that are branching into new regions. And one thing that is really important to consider in the gaming industry as well is just the nuances that come with expanding to new regions and how to have success in each, because there's no cookie cutter model for how to have global success. So really excellent topics, I think. But let's dive into this first one with the Roblox IPO.
Yeah, so Roblox went for their IPO Wednesday this week, and it's been coming for a while. They've announced it last year, I think, and it's really, I think, it divided people into disbelief and excitement. Roblox, a company, like what they're doing, right? Roblox is founded by, was founded in 2004, I think, and they released Roblox, the game platform, 2006, on PC first, and then later on iOS, Android, and even the Xbox, I believe. And this whole thing is pretty much like, it's pretty much a platform where which enables other people to make games, right? And so it's kind of almost like an app store within an app store, I would say, if you think about it.
Yeah. I think that's something actually that the average person may not even know, right? So they see this game Roblox and they say, okay, this looks a lot like Minecraft, but for kids. And, that really is kind of the first impression, is that it's just that open world, metaverse type of thing where you can create your own adventure. But they don't really see the business model behind this, right? But to your point, it is one of the most unique structures that we've seen right now in the gaming industry, and essentially just the core mechanisms that create this is that Roblox has this developer program essentially that allows anyone to create within their game, almost as if it's a game engine, right? So that they make it very easy to pop up these new game modes or products or anything in the game itself, and it can be monetized. And so as those developers that are building out specific, Roblox game modes or whatnot, you can actually make money, and quite a bit of it, by doing that as a career. And that's a really unique, almost crowdsourced content engine that Roblox is really using.
Yeah, like so for reference, for those of you who don't know how that model normally works, but you have a game developer that can be an independent studio, a studio belonging to a big player like EA or Activision, or small independent studios, which are plenty out there, small teams. I think like the example I could give there is the team behind Among Us, which was like a team of 4 or 5 people when they made Among Us and when it started blowing up. But normally you have an independent team which is self-publishing on a platform like iOS, Steam, Google Play, and then it's basically just them and the platform. Or you're a developer which is under the umbrella of another company, and then EA goes to Apple and to Google and to Steam and publishes there. And so the pot is then always divided. For every dollar you make, everyone takes a little bit something, right? And so the app stores, it's a different discussion altogether. But most platforms today take 30% cut of everything you make. So when you as a developer generate 100 USD revenue, you get actually only 70, because 30 USD go to the platform holders. And in the case of Roblox, they're almost democratizing game development, because they allow everyone to develop on their platform with a pretty simple, it's a Lua-based script language. So it's mostly attracting independent people. Some small companies are producing games there. And the advantage for them is that the approval process is pretty lean. So it's very easy to get a game on Roblox. Second, you don't have to worry about customer support. You don't have to worry about getting users to the platform. All of that is covered by Roblox. And they are taking about a 25% cut for that. Roblox is also taking another 25% cut for themselves, for R&D, for developing. Then again, like about one quarter goes to people like Apple and Google, which leaves the developer with actually what's formalized as 24.5%. 25%. So of every 100 USD you make as a developer on Roblox, you get 24.5 USD. And that's their business model. That is Roblox business model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely fascinating. And one thing that I, really thought was interesting when I was researching this prior to the podcast is who can sign up to become one of those developers. So they have this internal program called DevX, which is essentially the exchange where you can, redeem your Robux, which is the in-game currency, for real money. And the eligibility for that is actually really open. Anybody practically can sign up for that program. The only limitation, one of the limitations, is that you have to be 13 years old. And so what it's created is actually this whole, platform for young entrepreneurs, of people that have grown up playing Roblox, as a kid and still being a kid, but able to actually use it as a programmer and run a little business, which is pretty cool. And I also came across some really unique use cases where schools and programs were using it as like a development tool in order to teach systems and algorithms and stuff like that, which is really neat. And there were also, people at the upper end of that DevX program where they have set up real, businesses. One of the most popular game modes that has been created through this decentralized content engine is called Adopt Me, which is basically like a pet type of game mode. You can raise a pet, and there's lots of different items and stuff that you can have. That team that built Adopt Me actually put out a job listing last year where they were hiring for a game programmer and paying $100,000 salary. So not too bad if you're able to really, lean into it, create a successful product. You can run actually a pretty sizable business through it.
Yeah, I think if I'm not entirely wrong, during an event last year, Adopt Me had hold it 1.6 million concurrent players.
Wow.
Which is completely insane. Like if you Steam charts are open and publicly visible for everyone, right? If you look at the biggest games on Steam, how many concurrent players they have, I mean, there's no big surprises there, but they're the hundreds of thousands, not in the millions. It's, of course, this is like a special event and all of that, but even as a peak concurrent thing, 1.5 million for a game within a plot, like, it's crazy. It's really, really crazy. I mean, when you talked about that, the accessibility is really there, and I think that's one of the best arguments for Roblox as a platform as well, because it's like it's encouraging so many kids out there to get engaged with programming, with developing. Like programming is kind of, it's for the last 20 years, but it is the future. Like, so many jobs in the future will be in programming, and if you know how to program, if you start this logic, if you learn that early on, that really gives you an edge in the future in your career. And yeah, last year they had more than 350,000 developers on the platform.
Wow.
Which I mentioned that to Matt earlier, but it also comes with a little challenge, which is how is your game getting discovered on this platform? Like, if you're like one out of these 350,000 people, like how do people find your game? That's a different story. That's maybe one of the challenges.
As a publisher too, if you are Roblox, that's a benefit and a risk, right? Because first of all, you can't realistically go out and hire 350,000 developers for your game to be able to create new content, right? So huge advantage in being able to just have fresh new ideas and, kind of an open market where the best ideas will rise and stuff like that. But obviously that comes also with losing an element of control. And so a lot of publishers are very protective of their IP, the way that that's used, and they aren't necessarily comfortable opening it up to the public. But, in this event, where it is decentralized and it creates this very interesting advantage that Roblox as a company can leverage. One other aspect, as we're talking about the younger demographics, right? Because this game really is tuned specifically for younger kids, being very approachable and family friendly and all of that. A couple of the long-term challenges that they're going to face is, first of all, how do you keep this game relevant as your player base ages, right? Because at some point they're going to get older and they're going to see, oh, here's Minecraft, which is really similar, but it looks a little bit, more for older people. Like, maybe I should go into Minecraft, or there's going to be Call of Duty or Fortnite or all these other titles that are going to potentially steal your user base away. How do you prevent against that as a publisher?
Yeah, I guess it's like, that's something really, it's very, very hard for them to overcome. because ultimately you cannot. The whole appeal is their style, their art style, the simplicity, and I guess it speaks. This whole thing speaks actually to this whole. There's a shift happening. When I grew up, we always wanted to play the best looking game. It's like it was almost like, oh, there's a new cool game with new cool graphics out there. Let's try it out. But I think that's being completely reversed at the moment. That how a game looks doesn't matter so much. It doesn't even matter if it's a little bit scrappy here and there anymore, as long as it's fresh all the time. Content is consumed so fast nowadays that it's really like this feeling of freshness is much more important than polish. I think that's a major challenge for actually the established old publishers. If you think AAA, right? They're like, their business is to make the most polished product. And all of a sudden, what the younger generation actually wants, they want freshness. They want new ideas, new stuff. Every day they log in something new. And Roblox, like, they are that on steroids, right? Every time you log in, you can have a completely new experience. And all of these experiences are hyper social. It's purely focused on multiplayer. And it's driving that really, really hard. I mean, the game you mentioned, Adopt Me, right? Okay, it's kind of essentially it's like adopting kids. Then you have the piggy game, which is essentially a horror game where one of the players is the pig and is hunting the other players, or Jailbreak, where half the players are basically inmates and they are supposed to break out, and the others are like the guards. So all these are very social ideas, and these are the most successful games there. But yeah, I'm fully with you. This will lead to a situation where like eventually they want more. Eventually they want more like consistent experiences and prettier games and nicer things out there. But then, is that a problem? I mean, they're doing pretty fine right now. In preparation for this, looking a little bit at the numbers, right? Last year, they generated over 900 million USD revenue, almost 2 million bookings. The difference between revenue and bookings, by the way, is bookings is someone is telling you, I want to buy something. Here's some money. And the other thing is when it's in the books with a bookkeeper, with with the people who know finance. And at the same time, they had an operation loss, okay, like about 250 million minus, but a big cash purse at the same time, almost 500 million. So they're doing really, really well. I mean, generating almost 2 billion USD last year. Is it a problem if that just keeps going like that? Because new players are coming in naturally, new kids coming into the ecosystem automatically. If they eventually move on, maybe that's not the problem. And maybe with enough social elements, like they're going down this whole path of the metaverse, right? Being like a social hub for the new generation. Maybe they can even extend the life cycle from, let's say, 10 or 12-year-old on average to 16-year-olds. Because they don't go to Facebook anymore. I know that. So there is also an opportunity there still. And you if they just manage to expand the life cycle a little bit, can get them a long way.
Definitely. I think as the player base ages, a couple things that are going to be really interesting to monitor are going to be, will the developers in that developer studio program build something for these people, right? Because again, this is the community that is part of this development system. If they recognize like, hey, I'm kind of losing interest because these things aren't really for me anymore, what a great way, to have a really direct line to perhaps build something that is a perfect, product market fit, because it's coming from your market. The other thing to monitor is revenue per user. I was digging into kind of some more calculations to look at what the ARPDAU was, the average revenue per daily active user. And it's actually remarkably small, which I guess is to be expected given the player base, but it was about 5 cents as an ARPDAU. So as a standard, and obviously varies by the game, but it's about 10 cents for casual games, of average revenue per daily active user, and then did find one for Pokemon Go as well, which is 25 cents. So as this player base ages, that's when you would expect that number to go up as well. So if they are able to consistently engage that player base over time, that could be good news as well from a revenue perspective.
Yeah, I'm personally not so concerned with a lower ARPDAU because at the end of the day, it really depends. It's almost like a scale. If you go harder on the monetization side, you will practically leave more players behind. So the scale goes down naturally. And right now, they reported more than 30 million daily active users last year. And that is a super healthy player base. Like we're talking top 10 in the West sizes of player bases, right? There's really not many other games in the West which can compete with that. And so let's say it like this. Having a 30 million DAU game with a 5 cents ARPDAU is significantly better than having a 2 million DAU game with a 50 cents ARPDAU.
Yep.
Because it's de-risking your business. Like if you lose a few players here and there because they're disgruntled about something, no problem. There's more. If you have a smaller audience which monetizes harder, it's just much bigger risk for you. And a lot of games actually operate with a high DAU. Like of course, like the Candy Crush out there, right? The high DAU games. Our games arguably are all high DAU games. So I think it's actually fairly healthy. And the less you push on the monetization side, it also speaks for the longevity then, because people just sticking around longer, retention is likely higher. So I would think it's healthy. But of course, you're completely right. If you go in territory where these people have an actual income themselves and they're still sticking with the platform, that's a serious opportunity. But of course, it can also go away, right? You can also argue someone is 14 years old. They make a game there which explodes. Guess what? They're turning 18, they're turning 20, and they're like, oh, actually now I can make a game outside of the platform. And I take home more than the 24.5% Roblox is giving me. That's how I would see it, at least. Like personally, like when you're saying, okay, 70% of that could be mine. Yeah, then I have some costs. But I will still like realistically still 50% of the money will be mine. That's just doubling that, right? But you have other headaches.
So let me ask you this. So there are a lot of unique elements about Roblox, right? Especially with this decentralized content engine. And we talked about how important it is to maintain freshness in a game. Also something I think that we've seen publishers in China even be a lot faster with content versus Western publishers that tend to be a bit slower as far as just renewing the game with new content and game modes and stuff. Probably a topic actually that we could cover at some point, but just the general structure of how those development teams are built. In China, it's kind of like these internal teams that are competing against each other, all trying to create new content. And that's part of why that cycle is a lot faster. Whereas in the West, it's singular teams that are much more diligent in what they put out, and so it's more of a kind of a slower. They're both obviously effective models, right? There's no one cookie cutter strategy for how to have success, but is this decentralized type of structure where you're leveraging the player base themselves to create content something that you think we might see more of in the gaming industry?
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I ultimately think you're entirely right. There's a huge divide in how development happens east versus west, almost. Of course, China is very specific in this regard. I don't see a lot of user-generated content games or products coming out of China, because in China this is complex. It's a very complex topic to have a UGC game in China itself. And if you're producing in the first place for a domestic market, China is the biggest marketplace for games in the world. It's not the US. It's China by far, by the way. it's a hugest opportunity is in China. So that means domestic developers in China will produce for their market first, even if they do collaborations with Western brands. It's just natural that they would focus on that. But in the West, UGC is easier to do. but still I don't see many big brands. I don't see like Activision being out there and creating a UGC product, because that means loss of control.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, some of these companies, they're very old school in essentially very, very old school. They're afraid to give up control. You can see that not only in the products, but you can also see it on things like social media. There's almost this divide. There's on one side, you have like the old school brands. They manage their social media the old school way. And then you have the new upcomers who are challenging the status quo, and they do more what Wendy's Burgers is doing, you know? They're like out there, they're edgy, they're making fun of each other. They don't mind tweeting at a different brand. Well, I cannot really see, let's say, Blizzard Entertainment doing this. It's a big stretch, and because it means leaving up control. So a lot of the UGC stuff is coming actually from independent studios. I mean, Minecraft is likely one of the biggest brands out there when it comes to this, right? It was created by a small studio in Sweden. And now they're part of Microsoft, of course, and arguably Microsoft scaled them immensely. But the idea was not from Microsoft. They didn't start this. And so I don't think a Roblox could have happened, let's say, done by Ubisoft or by Activision Blizzard or by EA, because like they don't have that flexibility. And if you're like, let's say, a Ubisoft, you then have also this pressure that you cannot really take too many big risks, because they're so dependent on their ongoing successes. Committing like on something which might go south is really, really dangerous for some of these bigger companies. Ubisoft comes to mind first because they have 15,000 employees last time I checked. Of course, there's a lot of short-term contracts likely and temporary contracts, but for them taking big risk, it's rough, man, if you have to pay all these salaries. And I think there are some smaller companies, or especially now mobile first companies, and almost all mobile first companies have this risk taking baked in, because then you have a team with like 20, 30 people, and they're trying something, and if it doesn't fly, okay, let's move on next. And even some Blizzard experimented with that when they made Hearthstone, right? Because in the beginning nobody really believed in it, I guess, and not even within Blizzard we believed in it after seeing it until we had our hands on. So it's really tricky. Valheim now, another example, like of games which is mostly, I mean, really give the control to the player and let them do things. I actually wish that like Valheim is a great example. I'd love to see what a Blizzard, like or another big studio could do with the same idea, with proper AAA polishing, making it really cool, you know? Because I think there's a major opportunity there. Someone just has to take it.
This notion of, user-generated content, I think, is one that's really been around even for decades, that we're just now starting to see operating at scale, right? With like structures and models and stuff. But even, the MOBA games as a genre was a mod of a previous, RPG type of game. So it's really not something that's like new. It shouldn't be new news that the community is really creative and loves to make things. And so I think that, all publishers to an extent can, learn and, implement, things from user-generated content, whether that's game modes or whether that's structure of events, right? That's one thing that I try to advise community tournament series on is, you are the ones that are actually going out and experimenting what formats work, what the people like to watch, and, how creative these tournament organizers can be in coming up with these really novel game modes and formats and stuff. So publishers watch stuff like that. If there's one community tournament series that's really successful or has some engaging format, you may see that in the official esports league eventually, and then that's true also for content. YouTubers are innately very tenacious in their, proactiveness in coming out with new videos and new content and something fresh. And, that can also have ripple effects and impact official YouTube content as well that publishers put out. So even if it's not game modes and giving the power to the people to create things in the game itself and to monetize it, I think that there's still a lot of things that are almost kind of turning on its head in a way where there's creativity happening at the grassroots level that's kind of feeding its way up.
I fully agree with you, and this is like we see it ourselves in Brawl right now, for example, right? We've released the map maker last year, and it's still in beta. But what the community is doing with it is already so interesting. It's nothing like what we expected to happen, like nothing. But going back to your example with like Dota, actually.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one, right? Because it was developed on top of Warcraft 3, and Blizzard had such a big opportunity to just make that their own. They could have like, I think they were just not in the mindset to embrace this idea that there's like, oh, someone else did something on top of our game, even though we gave him the tool. They missed such a big opportunity. It's like ginormous if you think about it. Everything was like Heroes of New Earth, League of Legends, Dota 2, now like Honor of Kings in China / Arena of Valor. All these other games are all based on that idea. And of course, Blizzard had their try on it years later, but the market was basically divided already. So I think actually, depending on who you are, you might still be afraid of this, like this dynamic, right? And it's a tricky thing, but I ultimately don't believe into this whole old school control scheme anymore. I don't think it's the same when you touch on influencers. As a company, you need to make a decision. Are you empowering the people you work with, the creators you work with, to the degree that they can also say things about your game or your products you don't like to hear? Or are you just paying them a few $1,000 here and there for paid promotions? I think it's super healthy for brands to really work with the creators instead, and giving up some of that control.
Yeah.
Hey, but to take one step back,
yep,
just have one more thing about Roblox, right?
Let's do it.
Something which I find highly interesting, because it was highly controversial, of course, when people saw the value of the company. Roblox value like 10x in a year or so, and they peaked at like 75 USD per share, and that's about 44 billion USD of value. It went down a little bit by Friday, but they're still now, the market cap is 37 billion ish. To put that into perspective, Electronic Arts is 37 billion. Ubisoft is 8 billion. Nintendo and Activision Blizzard are 65, 70 ish. But okay, that means Roblox right now is valued as much as all of Electronic Arts. The revenue EA created last year was 5.5 billion, last fiscal year, 5.5 billion, with an income of 1.5 billion almost. Like, so, and all the brands under EA, just the FIFA, the Madden, like all the sport games, all the other games they're working on, it's absolutely insane. And they have the same value like Roblox today. So I do at least wonder, like, is there a little bit of a bubble? I really there's maybe a little too much enthusiasm about what Roblox is doing in my book, because there are risks. You've touched on some of them already, but there's other. Again, you don't have control what third-party developers are doing on your platform. Not completely. So that makes it prone to lawsuits left and right in my head. There's something inappropriate for children happening there, and you don't have full control over it. It comes up again. Sexual content is being shown. There's chat rooms which you don't have full control over. There is IP violations. It's a long list of potential issues coming your way, and the reliance on the developers. So yeah, there's a lot of risk, and then the actual results, the risk. If I would have to invest my money, I would likely give it EA. And Yeah, that says a lot, I guess.
And this, of course, this podcast is not financial advice.
No,
This
no,
is personal
absolutely not,
opinions,
guys.
and
Absolutely.
but with that said, I also recently have learned to appreciate that really novel things sometimes happen in the stock market, and we're seeing that with GameStop. We're seeing that with
Yes.
cryptocurrencies and Dogecoin. I mean, what is the value of Dogecoin right now? So is Roblox one of these that is just generating so much hype and public enthusiasm with such a novel company IPOing at this time that there is that much interest, and it's not necessarily based on the financials of the company. I think that's definitely a factor in what the value is right now of that company. I personally put a little bit of money in just to say that I bought Roblox on its IPO, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting case. If it's going to grow from here, they've definitely got to keep up their trajectory. So there was just looking back at the revenue from the last few years. This is just kind of reported. Revenue grew 56% from 2018 to 2019, and then grew 82% over the course of 2020. And that, of course, is because of COVID and kids playing
Absolutely.
the game from home and wanting to use it to socialize with their friends, and the network effects of that, right? Because when you get one new player, maybe you also get 4 of their friends that come with them. So that was a really good trajectory. And then the daily active users as well. We talked about that being over 30 million right now.
Yeah.
In 2019, it was 17.6. So phenomenal growth there as well.
Yeah, it's like the growth has been amazing. I do like growth has been not everywhere on the globe. I mean, it grew in many countries, especially in the West, of course. But the majority of the growth, majority of the additional money comes from the US, which I think is also risk. Like if something would, let's just say something would happen in the US, that would have a huge impact on Roblox as a holistically. And of course, like what happens once COVID is under control? Will people stick around there? Are they all of a sudden having normal hobbies again and normal activities? We don't know. It's too early to say.
Yeah.
I think the timing of the IPO was smart.
Yeah. Completely agree on that. Final data point on my end on Roblox. I thought this was absolutely fascinating, but half of children in the United States play Roblox. What an amazing stat. Well, awesome. It was interesting, actually, that we started discussing a little bit about MOBAs and how that genre originated, because that is a natural segue into our next topic here, which is the League of Legends import rule. So maybe I'll add a little bit of context to this just as an introductory part of this topic, but essentially League of Legends has a regional based esports scene. And so there's the LCS, which operates in North America, there's the LEC in Europe, and then there's regions as well in China and Korea with the LPL, LCK, all around the world, right? One of the hot topics that's being brought up right now, primarily being pushed by North American organizations, is they're trying to encourage Riot to remove an import rule that was put in place, I believe it was 2014, that says that no more than 2 of your 5 starting players can be imported from another region. So 3 of your players must be local residents and have that eligibility status as regional players, and then you can import no more than 2 others in order to fill out your team. And this has caused a lot of controversy on social media, with even team owners being very outspoken and getting into the weeds with fans on Reddit and on Twitter. And anytime something to that scale happens, to where these team owners of these multi-million-dollar companies are talking in that way to fans, it's something important. And I'll also kind of close this introduction off with a bit of a background on how this rule came into place. So League of Legends was formed in 2012, and at that time there were no rules on imports. And so you could sign as many players internationally as you wish. In 2014, there was a team that recognized that. It was a really talented team from China, also a Chinese organization. And they came over to North America and started competing, and they steamrolled the competition. League of Legends has a qualification system. So you first start off in the Challenger Series, and then if you win and get one of those promotion slots, at that time at least, you can make it into the LCS. And they did that. And then they performed well in the LCS itself and actually became one of the 3 teams to represent North America at Worlds, being an all Chinese organization with Chinese players. And so after that point is when Riot instituted this rule, essentially with the goal of trying to establish local roots in all of these regions and making sure that teams are representative of the people in each of those regions, essentially. And they said that you can only have basically 2 players imports. And then there were a couple smaller changes to that rule about like what makes them eligible or what makes them imports and stuff like that. But as it stands right now, you have to basically have played in that region for 4 years in order to become a regional player, or have legal residency or citizenship or something like that. And that brings us to today, basically, where there are all these rumors and orgs basically pushing to get this rule lifted. So we'll dig into a little bit more detail. But Frank, what is your first impression of this import rule?
It's like watching it from the sideline. I remember when this whole tweet drama came up between Vulcan and TSM Reginald, and it kind of exploded. Like there were some controversial tweets. Basically, Vulcan said something along the lines, "Hey, if you want more players from a region, why don't you then go to that region and have a team there?" And Reginald replied to that along the lines with, "If we would do that, you would be out of job pretty quickly." And so there was like just recently also like basically a round table. It was all streamed and stuff like that. So between Riot and a few organizations in the LCS, and it's very clear that the organizations they want to get rid of that rule. And then you have on the other side the players, the casters, and to a degree the community, which are like, no, keep it. Of course, like it's just a super interesting dynamic, and both sides come from very different angles. I guess there's good arguments on both sides, but looking at it from the outside, it's a funny one.
Yeah, I think one of the most important factors in this, right, because there are arguments on both sides, is that League of Legends itself is structured to be a regional league, right? There are separate divisions for LCS and LEC, and so to me, one of the things that this comes down to is if the goal, from Riot's perspective, is to use this regional system to grow the game in each of these regions, then it's important that there's that tie there, right? So that the esport, so that the teams are something that is relevant and engaging and something the viewers in that region want to watch. So as long as that remains the case, I could see it going either way. But to your point, it primarily is the North American organizations that are pushing for this import rule to be lifted, because I think that they also recognize that they are in a very valuable market, right? I mean, if these restrictions were opened and it becomes like a free market, essentially, the skill around the world will gravitate to the most valuable markets, essentially, because that's where the organizations are going to have the spending power to pay players and bring in these really skilled people. And historically, North America as a region has been very behind from a skill perspective, which is kind of what's spurring this conversation right now. So there's a lot of reasons why North America has kind of fallen behind in League of Legends. A lot of it has to do with the way that talent has been developed over the course of the last 8 years. Something that is improving now, and especially with these organizations like TSM and Liquid really putting up infrastructure and nice training programs into place. That's definitely something that's turning around, but still the Chinese and Korean organizations just seem to have better talent development and a better talent pool to pull from. And that also has to do with cultural reasons. This is another really interesting topic, which is the team dynamic in the West versus the East. And just because of the respect for authority and collectivism that comes with Eastern culture, it lends to a really constructive team environment for talent development sometimes. And actually, a lot of the best North American players even go to Korea to train. So something that, is just an inherent, disadvantage, if you will, for North America as a region, but has led to kind of an absence of talent. And as a final kind of point on this topic is that because the skill level in North America is relatively lower, it means that the few players in this region that do have international competitiveness, right, at that level, get really bid up from a salary perspective. Yeah. And with esports organizations being a really difficult business model, it's led to a situation where they're really burning money to keep these elite players and are trying to hope to find some sort of sustainability to, you know, reduce those expenses or just have more options basically to fall back on.
Yeah, man, there's so many thoughts on this, really. Like, so the interesting, like, one of the main arguments, right, from the organizations is that fans don't really care about this. There's no regional pride when it comes to a game like League. They are fans of a brand, and they want to see the best games, and they want to see victories, ideally. And if you look at the last 9 years of Worlds for League of Legends, in these 9 years, the US took 0 titles home, or North America, sorry, not the US, 0 titles, and they managed 3 times to get in the top 4. Okay, compare that with Korea, 6 titles, 14 in the top 4. China, 2 titles, 9 in the top 4. Wow. Europe, 1 title, 12 in the top 4. You can of course, then there's a smaller Pacific region. They actually also have a title, a team from Taiwan, I believe. And but of course, like, if we think about South Korea and China being like culturally special, you cannot have that same argument about Europe. However, Europe is interesting, right? Because you're like, it's a lot of countries, actually. It's not one country. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of countries. And we're talking about 750 million population in Europe versus 350-ish or so North America. And in Europe, like, people can, of course, it doesn't matter which country you're from. You can, if you're a European, you can play for any team in Europe, like G2 and whatnot. And so there's a much bigger market when it comes to players, to talent. So it's much easier to access it. And actually in Europe, within Europe, even within the national leagues, you know, for other sports, like, they have an import rule for people living outside of Europe, if they have one. But because of European legislation, you cannot deny someone from a different European country to take a job in any European country, because that would be discrimination. And that's not in the spirit of Europe, so to speak. Which is actually partially an argument used by team owners in the LCS. They say it's against the spirit of the sport that some people are not allowed to play in a specific region just because they're born elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And you can even argue, is it against the American spirit? Like, so I think that is an interesting one. Then you touched already on the salary inflation. Of course, smaller talent pool, the few which actually bubble through, they have bigger salaries. And the US salaries, compared to anyone else, are highly inflated in Riot's ecosystem. So it's crazy, which means higher cost for teams. Mm-hmm. So, and this whole train of thought then is like, okay, so I have a smaller talent pool to pick from. I have higher cost for these people. I have a lower success rate. That's kind of a vicious circle as a team to break out of.
Yeah. It's hard to blame the NA orgs. I will say, like, if you have a company that your investors are looking at this, like, you know, what are you doing? Right? So if I'm an NA org investor, I would be really proud of the people that are pushing for this. But of course, there are so many people that this would potentially impact, right? So the implications of this rule being lifted would be, first of all, that the region would get filled with non-regional talent. And so if you are an aspiring professional in North America for League of Legends, your path to the pros, which is already really small, is going to start disappearing, right? And that is very consequential as well when you start thinking about this from the publisher's perspective. Because esports at the end of the day is a marketing tool to grow the game overall. And I know that it itself is its own ecosystem. There are stakeholders that need to survive, right? And Riot does a phenomenal job. I still think, the best in the world at running an esport in the true essence of what it's, meant to be competitively. And they really also have a flag post in the ground for making decisions that are in the best interest of players, which is really admirable. And so in this sense, because of that, I would expect, and of course we'll have to see what happens with this, but I would expect them to, side on the side of players and growing the game regionally in North America and to keep this rule into place. But there are really, inherent challenges to operating an esports organization in this region, like we talked about, that also need solutions. And so I think there's going to have to be some sort of, middle ground to where, some of these core issues get solved, essentially.
And Riot has this whole construct around minimum player salaries and whatnot, which kind of already puts limitations in place. I guess it's interesting to look at real sports. I say real sports. Esports is a real sport, for the record. I think because this is not a new problem.
Yeah.
Not at all, actually. This is not a new problem. Most actual national sports, they started out having import rules where you couldn't bring in people, and all of them actually, and that might have to do with globalization and the world generally becoming smaller in a way. Like all of them are slowly but surely driving back these efforts, and it's becoming more and more like, yeah, we want to develop local talent, and we put measures in place so that happens. But we also have the freedom to compete properly. So, for example, in the German Bundesliga for Fußball, my cat is visiting me, might come into the picture, or a tail at least. There's a tail. It's interesting to see. Oh God, my cat wants to do things. Sorry, guys.
That's all right. I'll get my puppy in here pretty soon. I got a 9-week-old puppy that runs in here sometimes.
In the Bundesliga, so the German soccer/football league, right? There's a rule that you need to have at least X players from Germany on the roster. And I think even in the UK leagues or something, it's very similar. Like it needs to be X out of your starting line needs to be from the UK. And I think that's an interesting model because that still encourages these clubs to have players. Of course, they could just bench a lot of them, but they would have to carry the cost. But it is in the interest still from these clubs to develop local talent. And you could even formalize that more. You could say, hey, each of the clubs need to invest X amount of money into grassroots tournaments, into small organizations, into an academy team, which has only local talent. And yes, if you want pro players, you can import more. And you might still say, you can't just compromise. Right now it's like, there's already imports. You can already have 2 players imported in the LCS. So why not just say, okay, let it be 4. So you still have local talent in the team. And then at the same time, ask more from the clubs, from the teams. Say, hey, you need to invest X money. You can put a money value down to it. Say, you need to provide that for grassroots efforts for the local market.
Yeah.
So I think it's all about finding a good compromise which works for both sides. Of course, like let's be blunt for a second, right? I'm a player in the LCS, or I'm an aspiring player who wants to play in the LCS from the States. Of course, it's in my interest that they have to hire more players from the region. It just, like the moment I have to compete internationally, competition gets much harder to get a slot on a team. Um, but if it's about representing the region, maybe there's an argument made that it would be good for the region to have a better shot, like at winning worlds. So it's a really tricky topic. For me, it's all about finding a good compromise, which guarantees that local talent is developed and that there is grassroots efforts, and at the same time making the region more competitive. Now, truth to be said, I believe North America as a region is likely a smaller region for Riot when it comes to League of Legends compared to Europe or compared to China. But of course, it's like it's a good market to be big in.
Yeah, on the topic of grassroots, I think one thing that I would be very shocked at if it ends up happening is even if the import rule is removed, that also is the case for the Challenger series and the feeder systems basically, because that would really just dismantle all of these pipelines that have been built. And Riot themselves even have kind of revamped their collegiate initiatives and the amateur initiatives in the region as well. So it would be a shame to see all of that be set up and then suddenly be dismantled. But yeah, to that point, one other thing actually, just on the topic of the Bundesliga or English Premier League, one thing that's unique with esports is that a primary goal is to encourage other people that are watching to participate, right? Whereas like the EPL or the Bundesliga is not necessarily like a KPI is not how many people in that country are playing football, right? And that's a very unique thing with esports, to where that is again one of the primary goals of an esport is to encourage people to play and play more. So to the extent that again this impacts the local region's relatability or their connection with that local esport, that is something that can be a factor in consideration as well.
How do you feel about, I mean, we've just seen that in action, right? Overwatch League. I think London Spitfire's first team was Korean. Everyone there was Korean. And they played under the brand. They had a lot of fans. Like I actually think like most of the Overwatch teams, there was no, I don't think there was an import rule in place at all. But of course then Overwatch League as a whole is also not as big as Riot's circuit.
And very polarizing as far as whether people are optimistic about it or pessimistic about the league as a whole. So definitely a topic that I'd imagine we would dive into at some point.
Yeah, for sure. And they're also dominated by specific markets. I think, well, of course, China is big everywhere, but in South Korea it was so big. But yeah, it's like, I hope they just find a good compromise, which really makes sure that if you're an upcoming talent in North America, you should still have a realistic shot at going pro. I think that should be the goal. But you know how it is. It's especially with the ecosystem. You're as good as your environment. If you scrim every day and internationally speaking, the people you're scrimming against are like a 75% skill ceiling. You cannot get much better than the 75%.
Yeah.
But if in another region the skill cap is 95%, you have no chance to catch up with that. And that maybe speaks even more for having a more lenient restriction on importing talent, because of course that brings up the whole pool as well. Because all of a sudden you have like teams in the LCS scrimming against other teams which have like much stronger players. And all of a sudden you see, oops, we actually have to work much, much harder to get there.
Yeah.
So building a stronger infrastructure, like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you have a market full with people who are really enthusiastic about something and they're all really good, your own level will also creep up and get better and better. If you're playing against weaker teams or weaker players around you, you will never get better, because it's like you're only as you basically, it's I guess it's inherently human the moment you beat everyone around you, what is the incentive to get better?
And I think that's actually one of the main reasons why players in North America go and scrim and train in the off season in Korea. So
Hmm.
definitely another argument in favor of that. And for players that are in those regions like Korea that are very saturated with talent, it's also a very challenging path to the pros, right? Because it's so competitive. And so if we do make it, globally a better situation for them to make the pros in some other region, then that would be an advantage on that side as well. But yeah, I think this really puts into perspective just how nuanced and complicated the esports ecosystem is, because every single stakeholder has their own priorities and interests, and I think that it is a healthy environment for people to be outspoken about things that are in their personal self-interest, as a company or an entity, because that's when change really starts to happen at the system level, to really make it a better, more conducive scene for everybody. But we are seeing a lot of players actually being very outspoken in North America about the diminishing path to the pros. So very fascinating. I will say one other category that we hadn't really discussed is the sponsor and the brand side. So if this import rule is lifted, and North America as a region becomes one of the most stacked regions from a talent perspective, right? Just because of the market size, that's also good for brands. So would again be an argument that these NA orgs are really pushing for, because that would mean more revenue from that perspective and reduced expenses, at least from a cost per skill metric.
Yeah, and for brands, it's a major thing. Like, how many eyeballs are seeing the games at Worlds?
Mm-hmm.
And like, especially if you're a global brand, that's really something you're after. So for sure, I think that's
Yeah.
also why that must be one of the underlying reasons why organizations are pushing so hard.
Yeah.
And of course, and I'm saying that keeping in mind that it's already significantly easier for teams in the US and in general esports in the US to find sponsorships
Mm-hmm.
and partners to work with,
Yeah.
because of the unity in language.
Mm-hmm.
While in Europe you have the fragmented market when it comes to language, it's
Mm-hmm.
much harder. Of course, you still have international brands which are big brands everywhere in Europe, but it is a challenge. It
Mm-hmm.
is a challenge for sure.
Yeah, actually, one of my favorite videos talking about an esports organization's business model is from the Unicorn of Love's CEO at the time, talking about EU League of Legends, and how challenging it is because of that regional, diversity, or the language diversity, because you're working with a brand that you're trying to pump out to your whole audience or to the LEC's whole audience, but then there's like these fragments of, I think I wrote down a data point. I think it was there are 24 official languages in Europe, and there are 5 that have over 30 million speakers, which is really diverse, right? So if you're a company like an esports organization that's so heavily reliant on sponsorships as a revenue stream, then a fundamental thing is that you have to be able to create content or things that are going to reach your fan base. And so, it's hard enough to do that when there's one language that you are marketing in. But if you have to spread that across 5, or if you're limited to a fifth of the market share of people you can advertise to, it makes it really challenging. And that's a huge argument that EU orgs are making, and to keep the import rules, saying like, hey, if you're helping the NA LCS on some of their things like talent development, then what about us? Because this is a challenging scene for us as well as an organization.
Let's say you're Unicorns of Love, German organization. Your prime audience will be Germans, right? It's already like a much smaller chunk of Europe. It's like 85 million people. And then you want to promote your brand to other European teams, which is the most natural thing to do. They're the closest to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you provide streams also in French, Spanish, Italian, English, maybe a few other big language, Turkish, Russian. Okay, let's assume all these streams together reach the same amount of eyeballs one English US centered stream would reach. You still have a disadvantage because you're never reaching this critical mass of hype
Mm-hmm.
around your brand.
Yeah.
Like it's a you could argue Brawl Talk in Brawl Stars is one of these examples where
Mm.
we pretty much only do it in English. And so all our players, whatever their language, they can rally behind this moment. But if you would fragment that into 20 groups of 50,000 people, it wouldn't be as exciting or as hype. And that is something European teams always fight against. It's something very easy to forget. Yeah, challenging situation, but a different problem than what North America has when it comes to League of Legends. It's a very different problem.
Fascinating situation. I personally don't know. I don't have a prediction on what I think is going to happen in this case, but it's basically a decision of whether regional success should be relative to regional talent level or whether it should be relative to regional purchasing power. Because if it is a free market, we're going to be able to hit that critical mass in North America with a lot of different factors, and that includes importing a ton of skilled players. Fascinating stuff. So we also are going to talk about regional nuances in the final topic of this podcast as well. So I'm actually really excited to pick back up on that as well. But as a precursor to that, we wanted to highlight some of the top games that are going to be coming out this year because, frankly, there are a lot. 2021 is going to be a massive year. We want to focus a little bit on mobile in particular in this topic. But what are some of the games, Frank, that you're excited for this year?
Oh, man, it's so hard to choose. If like 2021 is really going to be a big, fat year for mobile in general. Like, there are so many big, beloved, oh, well, the cat is back. There's so many big beloved brands coming to mobile this year. Actually, like I think there's something going on with Japanese brands that a lot of beloved Japanese IPs like Castlevania, Devil May Cry, new IP, Nier, like they're all coming to mobile this year. But there's also Western IPs which are coming, like from Tomb Raider to like Star Wars Zynga and now Star Wars Hunters, like a brawler, whatever that means. They haven't shown any gameplay. But besides these, there's really like a host of really big hitters, which everyone expects to be big.
Yep.
Of course, like League of Legends Wild Rift is already on its way with a beta right now, and they're slowly rolling out. We talk about that in a moment a little bit more. But I think actually something I might be even more excited about is Pokemon Unite, which is another MOBA, and there's a bunch of MOBAs coming actually. But they have, of course, the brand recognition also among mobile players, unlike League of Legends. Then you have Diablo Immortal. There was just actually an alpha, I think, in some Asian countries, which is not longer going on. Blizzard during BlizzCon hasn't really announced if they're launching this year, so that's to be seen. But on the other side, then also Path of Exile, which is also PC title, action RPG, can be seen as a direct competitor to Diablo Immortal, I would say, which is developed by Grinding Gears in Australia. Valorant and Apex Legends might come to mobile this year. Valorant is more uncertain than Apex Legends. A new PUBG, the new state, is coming to mobile only. And so yeah, these are all like big hitters, but the list is so long, man.
Isn't it fascinating? I mean, there's literally never been more good games now than ever before, and I feel like every year we say that, so probably a good industry to be in, but it's going to become increasingly hard for publishers to differentiate because it's now such a high bar that you have to reach because there's so many good alternatives that you almost need something else in order to really penetrate. So I've always kind of said, this is more true from an esports perspective, but I think from a game overall as well, that you need three things for success. And this is oversimplification. It needs to be a good competitive game, right? Because there has to be some sort of skill curve or something for the in-game content to keep people engaged. But then you also need that really successful casual element of it, right? Because it has to be easy to get into. And that's really also the category that drives viewership for esports, right? Where you get these huge numbers like we see with Free Fire and even, League of Legends to an extent. But then you need that third factor, which is kind of like an X factor, because there are so many games and you have to really stand out. And there's been some unique things that have kind of filled that third element. I think that strong brand and IP is an obvious one. So something like a League of Legends Wild Rift already has a huge advantage because League of Legends is already so recognizable. Call of Duty Mobile was able to achieve 100 million downloads in its first week. That was back in 2019, but that was a record at the time. So they were able to accomplish that, of course, because of the strong Call of Duty franchise. But then you could have these really wild X factors that are, creative and off the wall. And I think actually Brawl Stars is a good example of that because of the cross-pollination and able to really activate across Clash of Clans and Clash Royale with an in-game mode that advertised Brawl Stars in Clash Royale and included brawlers in the game, which was really novel at the time. So there are lots of really creative ways, but the reality is that you just can't, rely on App Store advertising or just, standard digital marketing online. It's so competitive right now, and fans are being bombarded with mobile game ads already that you need something that's going to really stand out from the pack.
Yeah, ultimately, like it's incredibly hard, and you've seen that actually over the last 10 years, I would say that actually publishers struggle, even publishers which were very, very successful on the PC or on consoles, they struggle to bring their games to mobile. And there haven't been many success stories from these big guys to adapt to the mobile ways in a way. Yeah, there have been a few stories here and there, but no huge successes. And most of these huge successes, Call of Duty Mobile, you called out, right? It's like, you could say Activision Blizzard is such a big player, but they didn't do that alone. They did that with Timi Studios at Tencent, one of the Tencent studios. And actually, in fact, when we talked about these 10 or so games, which will be released this year, like most of them are developed in collaboration with a Chinese partner. Tencent and NetEase, like most renowned, like, and it's actually interesting. Like you touched on it earlier, that in the West you have the singular studio approach, and in the East it's more like cutthroat, so to speak.
Yeah,
that you have sometimes even within the same company of competition. Actually, Honor of Kings or Arena of Valor in the West is a result of that. Two competing studios within Tencent both did a MOBA, and only one won the market afterwards. And so they have absolutely no problem. It's a little bit like shark embryos. Like the strongest ones will come out, and it's okay, and it stays in the family. But there's something to be said that some of the Western studios struggle with coming out with these mobile blockbusters. I mean, Free Fire, you touched on that. Garena is like also coming from Asia. So like there must be some secret sauce, and that is in many ways they're just so fast in executing big titles. The experience is huge. They're just missing the brands which are renowned in the West, basically. So, and that's why we are not seeing like bigger titles yet. Like Call of Duty Mobile is a game mostly made in China, and which is successful more in the West than it is in China. PUBG Mobile, like, I mean, it's been a few years now, but it's also been like transformed from the PC version to mobile in China. And so it's very hard to compete for Western companies, and that's I think is why so many Western companies are seeking the collaboration, co-development in China.
And also, of course, helps with getting approval within China, which is such a massive market, to have a partner locally like Tencent or like a NetEase in order to get regulatory approvals and localized elements, which is obviously such an important factor. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about that in the regional discussion later. But one of the things that's so, fascinating to me as we look at this list are, Pokemon Unite. There's a couple in particular. I want to point out Boom Beach Frontlines and Catalyst Black, where it's this really unique element or genre that's almost like PvPvE, where it's like this simultaneous world that there's always action, and then you hop in and you're competing against people, yeah, but then also against the environment, and there are bosses and quests and stuff that you can do as you're also simultaneously competing with teammates or against other people. So it's this really interesting dynamic where I think Catalyst Black is really trying to push this as well. Of course, the publisher is Super Evil Megacore, who historically has kind of been on the bleeding edge of a lot of different things, right, with Vainglory. But they are really trying to push cross-platform, open world, and just like always action. And so you hop in at any time. You can play a long session, you can play a short session, but there's always something happening, always connected with your friends socially in the game. And this is their new, calling card, Catalyst Black, that they're putting all of their resources into. So I'm actually really curious to see how that turns out.
I think it's really smart. And I think it's a little bit of a change from where they're coming from, actually. I remember initial interviews about Vainglory, where it was really about, like, they had the belief that people would play longer sessions on mobile. And that might be true in Asia, but it's not true in the West, not to the full extent. The session length need to be pocket-sized. Like, of course, there's always the hardcore. Look, you have hardcore people who play games like Brawl or like Wild Rift or whatnot for 8-12 hours a day if they're in the mood. So you, of course, always have this group of hardcore people. And that's not what I'm talking about here, because that represents like a 1%, 0.5%, 0.1% of your audience on mobile. So the majority of people need the short session time to make it successful.
Yeah.
And so having this attitude of people being able to jump in and out very quickly, I think is super important for games in general on mobile. At least to become a mass phenomenon. If you're okay with being niche, with hundreds of thousands of people or like low in the million DAU, fine. Then you can do other things. If you're very centered on one market in Japan or in Korea or China, or very specific markets, by the way, you can also get away with something like that. Because like in Korea, you have all these hardcore MMOs on mobile, which have like hundreds of thousands of players, but monetize like crazy. And in Japan, the situation is similar. But I think if you want to be successful globally, you need to respect that people want to jump in and out as fast as they can sometimes.
And responding to this unique mobile audience is something that a lot of publishers struggle with, even ones that are really experienced in PC or other platforms. And so when I look at a game like Wild Rift, obviously one of the most exciting games that are going to be launching globally this year, all eyes are on Wild Rift from an esports perspective. I think that it has a lot of very unique challenges that the publishers themselves may not even be aware of, just given that this is kind of new territory for them entering into mobile. And I think that it's going to come down to some very specific keys to success. First of all, I think that they need to recognize that they cannot be overly reliant on their IP, because this is something that they have especially, and I don't think that it's a fault to them. Obviously, it's a huge strength, right? But it's just to that point of like your biggest strength can also be a weakness sometimes. When you look at different regions like Southeast Asia, League of Legends is not, it's popular there, but Wild Rift has not really taken off as much because there is Mobile Legends. There's Arena of Valor also in that region, and they have such strong footholds. They have content creators signed to exclusivity agreements in the genre. They have Mobile Legends brand ambassador programs in colleges and in schools. It is such a difficult market to penetrate, and you can't just be like, oh, we're League. People are going to love the game, right? Because they're already very situated in their games that they know and love already. So if you do launch a new game, you need something just besides that IP in order to stand out specifically in regions that are already taken, basically. And that has been something that's been a notorious, Achilles heel for franchises like COD or Fortnite, which never really, took off at the same scale in Southeast Asia, even though they launched and were like, here we come. So I think that that's going to be something that Riot needs to just be aware of, is that, you can't be overly reliant on your IP as a whole, because you are working with a new audience. You're also working with a younger and a more casual player base than you're historically used to, right? And we talked about that with session times, but that's also true for things like esports broadcasts, right? And I think a great example of a mobile first esports broadcast is actually Brawl Stars, which has gone, above and beyond as far as cutting down the downtime between matches so that you don't have dips in viewership, right? You have to really account for the average mobile player's attention span, right? So if you have too many caster segments or strategy breakdowns, like I love those personally, right? But you're going to lose the majority of your casual players because that's not what they're most interested in. They're interested in gameplay. And then you've got to just kind of build from there and build player brands. It's a really difficult esports environment, but you can't lose that heart of your casual viewership base because it's going to be the majority. And then one other thing, this is huge actually, is that you have to actually prove that there's a market for mobile MOBAs, because you also look back and you have these two phenomenal games, Arena of Valor and Vainglory, that tried this exact same thing before you did. And Vainglory, I will die on this hill. I still think it's one of the most beautiful games that have ever been made on mobile. Just the graphics, the capabilities. They implemented Fog of War in a MOBA, which was groundbreaking like technology at the time. No other game had really done that because it was just, the algorithm itself is very challenging to crack on mobile. And then Arena of Valor, right? Which is a game that had so much hype around it because, hey, here we have Tencent behind this. This is going to be the real deal. People started lining up, left and right to cover this game, and it just never really took off. And I think the main failure for both of those games was that they didn't really appeal to the casual player base. They never scaled their player base, unfortunately. And then, some other unique challenges like Vainglory had a really tough time monetizing. People got too used to free skins and in-game content. And so by the time that Super Evil Megacore recognized that and optimized their monetization systems, the player base didn't want to pay for stuff. And so that was a bit late. But they have to prove that there is a market and a player base that will gravitate to mobile for a MOBA genre. And I think that it is, I think that it's there. I think that it's possible because MOBA on PC is very popular, even on console and Smite, like there are healthy players that love MOBAs, and I think that that's going to be true for mobile as well. But you've got to be able to learn from successes and failures that have come before you.
I think it's definitely true for some markets at least that MOBA still needs to be proven. In China, nobody would say that that's the case anymore. Right. Honor of Kings is by far the biggest game, and Honor of Kings, most people we're talking about. And Arena of Valor was the Western brand, but Honor of Kings is likely the biggest game on the planet.
Yeah. That's an important distinction. It definitely needs to be proven in the West, North America,
yes.
And Europe in particular, but obviously in the East, very popular.
And of course, Mobile Legends in Southeast Asia, like a huge success there.
Yeah.
I think Vainglory did a few things wrong in retro perspective. I think the long session time and the insistence on the longer session time was a problem. You're saying it was one of the most beautiful games. I say it was maybe one of the worst performing games, technically speaking. So it looked really great if you had a high-end device, and it ran nice on a high-end device. But we're talking about market expansions a little bit later when we talk about Free Fire. But one of the successes for Free Fire is coming from the fact that it's not a 2 gigabyte download.
Yeah,
it's 200 megabytes or so. And 400 megabyte installed on the device and runs on a potato. and that is like, if you actually look at the most successful games on the planet in general, like Blizzard. I mean, Blizzard in the early days, they always made sure that their games are running on an average PC. And I think like when Half-Life came out and Counter-Strike became, of course, super popular, that also ran on the lowest spec PCs. You just had to tune out the graphics. So I think the long session time was a mistake for the West for sure. The tech was great, but not tailored where's the majority of people.
Yeah.
And then it was also kind of advertised as a real mobile hardcore experience on mobile, which surely pushed away a lot of people. then this whole, like at that point, especially, right, there was this whole feeling around toxic communities around League of Legends and so on and so forth. So I was like, it's not really great as a brand actually, and a little bit of that pops up. You touched on it, like League with Wild Rift, they have to understand, and I'm sure they do because they're working closely with Tencent, that the brand will not carry everything. They don't have a mobile audience. They do not. It's like, it's very easy to go into this with a self-understanding. Oh, we are League of Legends. We are the biggest esports on the planet. And now we're on mobile. Of course, people will come and play our game. It's not going to happen like this. And you have to basically build the community from scratch almost.
Yeah.
Because there's no, like, your community's on PC. And most of them are hardcore. And most of them hate the idea that people play a prettier version of the game on mobile. If you watch the in the wake of like the start of the season earlier in January, I think, where Riot had their broadcast where they introduced what they're gonna do this year, there was a short segment about every game they work on, and super interesting, high production value, great thing. It was a live stream or live broadcast at least, and the chat the moment it was talked about Wild Rift was just so toxic, man. And like really, really bad. And that is the Riot player base.
Yeah.
So basically you're fighting against this, and every player coming into your community, you have to go through this somehow to reach you.
Yeah.
So basically you have to start from scratch. Like I like, and then you have this whole topic of, can MOBA with the complexity work in the West? I think PUBG and Call of Duty both proved that more complex control schemes can work in the West. Right? You can argue that years before nobody would have done, like, the controls like of any of these games, or even Fortnite Mobile when it was still there, was just highly complex. And I'm like, you need to be a younger player today. You need to grow up with mobile devices to fully appreciate and understand how to work it. Older players are like hopeless when it comes to these control schemes. If you are not exposing yourself actively, but why would you? If you have a PC and you want to play an FPS or mobile, you play on the PC. Why would I go through 25-30 minutes on a mobile device if I just go 5 meters to the left and sit on the PC and have a better experience where I don't have to learn everything from scratch? So yeah, I think League of Legends Wild Rift has a battle ahead of them. I know they're hyped right now in the esports community, but when you look at the numbers so far, it looks suspiciously like Arena of Valor in the KPIs. It launched in Europe already, right? And like, first I looked, of course, in the results in Korea and Japan. Japan is a very specific market, so you cannot read too much into it. South Korea, League of Legends is big. The game is not, Wild Rift didn't hit there at all. And then in Europe, I saw a lot of hype. And I still, like, if you follow esports organizations, there's still like interest and hype, and they want to run like tournaments and all of that's going on. But it's not underlined with numbers today.
I've actually had a lot of people reach out to me over the last like month or two. Content creators who are, creating content and the viewership is just not there yet. And they're asking, is this going to come with the Americas launch? Like, should I stop creating content until it's global? And I've had even people at, prominent streaming platforms who are placing a lot of bets on themselves internally with Wild Rift initiatives ask me, like, look, I've seen these numbers. Should I not be putting all my eggs in this basket? And it's, I don't have a good answer for that, because obviously I need to know what Riot is planning once this global launch goes into place. I do think that they have a lot of marketing tactics that they're waiting on, just because Riot is a North American company. They have a lot of prominent North American brands. They already have had some crossover events, pulling in League of Legends celebrities and creators and players into it. There's been a massive push in Southeast Asia with the Pentaboom content series. They were able to get Faker involved. So there's been, some work done. But I think there are a lot of people that are really hoping that Riot has something huge up their sleeves once this global launch really rolls out later this month.
The question for me really is if the concept still works, like for new audiences who are exposed. Like, we're talking about people who grow up with Fortnite. They have like new stuff every day in the game, big events. The game is changing all the time, and then you have a mobile which is not bad. It's the same game every day. Yes, there can be new skins, new champions, heroes, but it is like it's just a different experience.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how that's fitting the time, if you have to find a new audience. Now, I'm actually on that topic. I am more bullish on Pokemon Unite, like, because in that audience, in the mobile audience, Pokemon is a brand. Pokemon Go made sure of that.
Yeah.
And so all these players know like the brand. It will be released on Switch and mobile at the same time.
Yep. I think there's a beta going on or an alpha actively in Canada right now for Pokemon Unite.
They have a different challenge. I actually think like the brand will just resonate with the audience better.
Yeah.
Because people will just play it because it's Pokemon.
Yeah.
It's a new Pokemon game. People will play it. And especially for a younger audience, I think that makes much more sense than League of Legends.
Yeah. Isn't that a little bit counterintuitive? Like, if you're a PC publisher and you have a game that is so much better mechanically, better graphics, it's just such exciting moments, right? And I think that Riot's done an amazing job, highlighting that in the teasing of the Wild Rift, right? Talking about how this is a true, authentic League of Legends experience, phenomenal mechanics. I think it's, the best mechanics that we've seen so far with the mobile MOBA, at least with like joystick mechanics. And yet here we are with this Pokemon Unite, which is a much simpler game. Nobody's expecting it to be like the biggest mobile esport in the world. And yet it's going to be so broadly applicable to everybody because of the Pokemon IP. And people don't go into it thinking like, oh, all right, this is like a competitive game. They're just there to have some fun. And yet it can potentially have a bigger ceiling. I just find that so fascinating. And I hope that that's something that's on Riot's radar as far as like how mobile is very unique as a platform.
I think the number I've seen, right, is like, it's all like rumored, not final, etc. But Pokemon Unite will have something like 21 Pokemon at release, which is a tiny amount. It means they can add a ton. But then let's say 20% or so of your revenue comes from like things like skins and stuff like that.
Yep.
You cannot really do skins.
It's true. Yeah.
Like your Pokemon is like,
yeah.
So your Pokemon cannot just change how they look. I think gameplay-wise, it's super interesting because, of course, the evolution of the Pokemon as part of it, like, makes so much sense. It can work really well in a mobile environment. I think that's pretty cool. It looks actually good. It's, of course, more like Pokemon and not realistic or anything. I just think they have different challenges. And when it comes to esports, of course, again, Pokemon Unite is a game made in collaboration with Teamy Studios, another Tencent company. So they have the experience under their belt to make a MOBA. But Pokemon as a brand, man, they're so close to Nintendo. Nintendo doesn't exactly have a great track record in supporting the esports scene, for example. How will it monetize? I guess they have to sell Pokemon. It's really different challenge, entirely different challenge than Wild Rift.
Definitely. I know that there's challenges also with like creator support, like, Riot does a phenomenal job setting up programs to give
Yeah.
access to special features or game modes, and historically, I'm not aware of that being the case with Nintendo and Pokemon games. And so there are a lot of things that I think Wild Rift can particularly lean into. I think if it really comes down to a few elements for me that I think that they need to really focus on to have success, it's going to actually come from success in 3 games. The first one is Free Fire, because they've had success in large part, of course, because of the accessibility and you can play it on a potato, but also because of the style. It has phenomenal skins and playable characters. Cristiano Ronaldo, one of the biggest celebrities in the world, is a playable character. And there's just so much style to playing Free Fire that it's got that allure. And so I think that Wild Rift can accomplish that as well, especially because of their ability to create phenomenal skins. Mobile Legends is the second thing that I think they ought to learn from, and particularly how they establish their roots in Southeast Asia. It's one of the most important people. I wish I had his name offhand, but I keep hearing about him as I talk with my colleagues in Southeast Asia. He's the guy that built the collegiate programs and the brand ambassador programs in Southeast Asia that helped to establish these strong roots. To my knowledge, he's now at Riot, so that helps. But what can be done to help establish those types of roots in the West? So maybe there are learnings from what League of Legends is doing at the collegiate level or amateur level for PC, and how that can be applied to a Western market. But definitely, that game in particular has got such a stronghold, and also again, a lot of exclusivity agreements that have kind of gone out with content creators, which I think is interesting. The third example is Call of Duty Mobile, actually. And so while COD Mobile Esports was, it left a lot of people wanting more last year just because there weren't many like public events or, broadcasts, and they even canceled the World Championship event because of COVID and all of that. There were 2 broadcasts in total, and I think they were actually really good. And that is one thing that I think that the Wild Rift team should really look at, because there was phenomenal crossover between some of the established casters and personalities in the Call of Duty space that were able to come in and cast the mobile version as well, along with content creators in COD Mobile, and that ended up being a phenomenal dynamic. And I saw even in Brawl Stars, Uber Shouts come in recently and really carry a lot as like a really professional caster. I just think that dynamic really works well when you put someone that is already very established as a caster along with game experts. And also with the ability to pull in other personalities and creators and create these like nice crossover events. I think that that's something that Wild Rift has as a strategic advantage. Even though there are obstacles like we talked about porting that PC player base over to mobile, but those would be kind of the 3 things: style, roots, and crossover.
Look, Riot for sure has like what it takes when it comes to the regional infrastructure of their teams around the world. I think then they have like one of the biggest partner you can have on the planet with Tencent, especially when it comes to China and Southeast Asia. They have the top expertise there, and it's like they have a lot of opportunities. I guess it is a pretty good segue into our last topic, actually.
Let's do it.
While we're on the topic and talking about games expanding in specific markets, because one of the games which is doing this in an excellent fashion is Free Fire from Garena. And they specifically they've achieved what they achieved by going very, very local, with local teams and localizing their games with the highest effect, especially, of course, like we're talking about Southeast Asia, Indonesia, like a huge country, and Brazil, but also other countries in Latin America. And you see the momentum actually in the Spanish-speaking countries. It hasn't touched the US as of today, but in Latin America, it's like it has a phenomenal growth behind it. And the game Free Fire, if you haven't heard, guys, it's another battle arena.
Yeah, it's a battle royale, but
battle royale game.
Yeah.
Was released originally in 2017, and the company behind it is Garena. It's a company headquartered in Singapore. I will talk about that a little bit more in a moment. And in May 2020, they had 80 million daily active users. We talked about Roblox a little bit earlier with just over 30 million.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a game that is more than 2.5 times as big as Roblox with their audience. Like there's something very curious about the business side here. I need to talk about that before we go into the game side.
Yeah.
So the company which owns Garena is a company called SEA Limited. Mm-hmm. And their main business is actually they have financial services, they have an e-commerce platform, and they have Garena. And Garena carries the rest of the company. Like, because Garena itself is profitable, but the parent company, they generated last year 4.4 billion USD, which is like a 100% increase over 2019. But they had an operating loss of 1.6 billion.
Ouch.
Which is like deep in the red.
Yeah.
But Garena is profitable under them.
Wow.
And so it's really, really, really highly interesting to see that dynamic. So I wouldn't actually be surprised that if at some point they would have to sell Garena. Because like it could totally happen, depending on what the dynamic, or maybe they might be interested in selling it. Depends a little bit where the focus as a company is. However, as a game, so they started in Southeast Asia, right? And really managed to get, especially in Brazil, they're a phenomenon. They're the biggest game by far in Brazil. Huge audience. And talking about the localization a little bit more, when you think about esports, you think very often about English broadcast. It's actually, like, for example, in the case of Brawl Stars, it's a real problem for us. Our audience is so global and so distributed that it's very hard to get a critical mass for a stream. And you will never see one huge stream for Brawl Stars esports because it's distributed over X languages, and we involving our creators a lot in co-casting these streams just to reach more people. So we cannot rely on one stream because English is not our biggest language. But if you're in specific markets, it can really work that individual streams take off a lot. And Free Fire is one of these examples. Brazil is a country of 300 million people. It's one of the biggest countries in the world population-wise. So having like Brazilian stream for Free Fire tournaments can obviously like garner like huge attention. And so you can get these crazy numbers of concurrent viewers for your esports efforts, for example, which is absolutely insane.
100%. I have some stats to kind of kick off the segment too. So let me go rapid fire here because it may blow people's mind if they're not familiar with Free Fire. Not only was it the most downloaded mobile game in 2019, but it was also the most downloaded mobile game in 2020. They ended up getting 266 million new downloads in 2020. Frank mentioned the 80 million daily active user record that they hit, which is just mind-boggling. It's also the #1 highest grossing game in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and India, 3 of their obviously key markets. That was the highest grossing data in Q4 of last year. And then if you look at YouTube as well, it's one of the games that is just taking over from a content perspective. So it's in the top 3 on YouTube as far as game time watched in 2020. It was behind only Minecraft and Roblox. It was the #1 mobile-only game in both 2019 and 2020. It's #2 for live content watched. So it's massively popular for streaming. Huge player brands, with upwards of 7-8 figures of total following. The #1 live streamer in the world, in fact, is Nobrew, who was the 2019 world champion with Corinthians, and he's since kicked off his own esports organization and brand marketing company, Fluxo. They were able to get 72 billion views for Free Fire related content globally in 2020 on YouTube. And one of the biggest success stories is Loud, which is a esports organization that got their start in the game. I had actually kind of posted about this early last year, May 30th. They passed 1 billion views on their organization's YouTube channel. They were actually the first esports org of any platform to accomplish that, even though some have had 15, 16 years of a head start. Loud was able to accomplish that in only 16 months of existence. At that time, they were passing FaZe Clan. Loud got 1 billion views on their YouTube channel. FaZe Clan had 961 million, so very close. But since that time, Loud has continued to take off. They're now sitting at 1.86 billion views and nearing that 2 billion mark, whereas FaZe Clan is only at 1.08. So the growth rate for this region is not slowing down at all.
Very, very different trajectory there. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just incredible. One of the things that I talked about earlier is the style that this game has. They really do have a lot of entertainment and cultural celebrities, and crossover events. I mentioned Cristiano Ronaldo is on board as a playable character in the game, and they launched a whole game mode around him. Would love to know what the financial structure is of that deal, just to be a fly on the wall there, but I'm sure that was a sight to see for sure. In addition to that, they work with local DJs in Brazil, and they're also playable characters, and just one of, honestly, the coolest esports scenes that you will ever watch. I wish I spoke Portuguese just to fully appreciate what's going on there, but man, it's something special for sure.
Yeah, these guys also have a great trajectory and growth now when it comes to like other markets in Latin America and Spanish, and that ranges like from Mexico to Peru and Chile. Like they're growing like crazy almost everywhere in Latin America, or grew crazy. I think it's slowly starting to stabilize. They are the most played game in parts of Latin America, Brazil of course, but also in other parts, and in Indonesia, which again, Indonesia is one of these countries. It has one of the biggest growth trajectories when it comes to population. So Indonesia and Brazil is like two ginormous countries, basically, like when it comes to population size. So and in India, of course, they were helped by the fact that PUBG Mobile was banned.
Yeah.
And they were like just waiting for this opportunity to take over. It's going to be interesting to see when PUBG comes back to India, because it obviously was announced by Krafton that they will start a local version of PUBG Mobile for India. It's gonna be interesting to see if they can take that back. But yeah, on the other side, they've not seen any traction in in the high monetizing Western markets. Not in North America, not in Europe, nothing. There's no movement whatsoever. But I understand they want to push there. So it's interesting to see if they will be able to compete with what's in the market already.
Yeah. How do you think they would do that successfully if you were in charge of their expansion?
I think they should just keep doing what they're doing, because they're hyper local today. But of course, it's like frankly speaking, the countries they've picked for that is kind of a smart choice. You go to Brazil, you go hyper local. Brazil is a huge market in population size. Indonesia the same. Like it's easy to come in and localize for these markets because they're so big. Now in the US that could work, but then there's loads of competition. In Europe, much harder to do. Something might work in Germany and it will not work in France at all. So yeah, they're kind of they picked up that niche of emerging markets, big emerging markets. India is a great opportunity for them. So India, Indonesia, and Brazil are like they are the best markets for them. And Latin America arguably is also really, really good opportunity for them, because again, they can just play with the cultural implications. Most of these markets consume the same content, and of course it's very like most of Latin America consumes very similar content outside of Brazil. And of course maybe they have a foothold in Spain by proxy then, because there's also, of course, similar content consumed.
Mm-hmm.
But it's gonna be a much harder battle because players in North America as well in Europe have better devices on average.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a bigger pool of competitive games to choose from. And there might not be a niche for Free Fire there.
Mm-hmm.
Financially, it would be great if they would pull that off, because of course these markets monetize much better than Indonesia and Brazil.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
up to 5 cents you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
for Roblox, that would be quite the feat to achieve that in Brazil or in Indonesia.
Mm-hmm.
It's much we're talking about much lower numbers there.
Yeah. And I think actually on the topic of monetization, Free Fire is one that's structured really well. They are the highest grossing game in all of these regions, and they do a
Yeah.
phenomenal job with new content and skins and playable characters. So the model is there. And so if this can be, crossed over into these high revenue regions, I just wonder what the ceiling is from a revenue perspective for these titles.
Their pricing structure is also adapted to the markets.
Mm.
That's part of their success, I believe. While a lot of other games don't do that. It of course depends really like fully on your structure. How you do you want to have a global game? Do you want to have a game which is cross-regional, or
Right.
are you okay if a market is small? But again, that leads to, you cannot, in Europe, for example, you will have to, it just doesn't make sense to fragment the player base in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So you will have the same service to everyone in Europe. So then you have to almost exclude Russia, I guess, if you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And all the Russian-speaking countries are one entity, and the rest of Europe is one, and having different pricing schemes there and separated player pools so that it's fair.
Mm-hmm.
But it's trickier. It's not that straightforward. Lots of complications.
So let's talk about some of the regional nuances then. So we have Free Fire as a great case study to kind of dive into some of these. But when it comes to different regions around the world, obviously the strategy for success is very different. And I think that's something that publishers are obviously really realizing now, but the general public may not quite be aware of. Why is a game successful here and not in another region?
Yes.
Off the top, I just wrote some general notes, but we can dive into a lot. There are certain regions, I think Southeast Asia is a great example of one, Europe as well, where it's often grouped together. People just say, oh yes, Southeast Asia as a region. But in practice, it's so difficult because you need a country-specific strategy in order to operate, because Indonesia is very different from the Philippines, is very different from Korea, and then there's also local entities that are very successful and specialized. So Garena in Southeast Asia, or Tencent in China. And so often a strategy is to partner with one of these companies. Garena works with many others to expand games to Southeast Asia as a region just because of these nuances that we're talking about. And then you look at a region like, let's take Arabic-speaking countries, right? So not only is this a language barrier that you have to overcome, but you can't just simply translate it, right? Because that language reads right to left. And so maybe there's UI changes and elements that need to be flipped or reorganized. And then there's cultural differences. The way that you present skins and, sexual appeal and design is different in those types of regions as well. So you must be localized to be appropriate for cultures. And then you take a look at something like North America, where we talked about the high upside and the purchasing power of this region, but it's also one that is fiercely competitive, and players have so many options and so many platforms. So what in your mind are some of like the key things that the average person ought to know about like regional nuances when it comes to success for games?
It's a very complex topic.
Yeah.
It's very much dependent on what kind of game you have in front of you. Let's take a game like Clash of Clans or Clash Royale, for example. Both games are global. They're fully global. They're high latency games. You don't need a good connectivity. So you can have someone from the US playing against someone from South Africa, no problem. So you can literally play around the globe. You can play from an airplane with a crappy airplane Wi-Fi. If you have a game which is real-time FPS, low latency requirements, you need to branch out already. But you still have options. You still can draw a hard border, or you're softening up like we do in Brawl, where we say we do latency tests in the beginning of the session, and then people can play together, even if they're in different regions. But it's decisions you have to make, and the complexity coming with that is easily underestimated, because like it's like, let's say you're Free Fire. Latin America is a great example. All modern games require cloud coverage, right? So you need a major, like nobody is building their own server centers anymore. It's not economically viable at all. It makes no sense. That's the old way of doing things. Like World of Warcraft, League of Legends in the beginning, they actually went to Frankfurt, for example, and set up a server site themselves. So it was Blizzard-owned hardware. But today, everyone is operating in the cloud. So it's servers somewhere sitting in a server farm owned by Amazon, Google, Tencent, or Microsoft. These are like the big four, actually. Like Amazon with AWS, biggest cloud provider on the planet. Google Cloud, really wide network. Amazon Azure, and the gaming services around that, and Tencent Cloud, of course, centered around China, but they're everywhere on the globe. Mm-hmm. Now, the interesting thing is these guys have infrastructure very often in the same places. So if we're looking at all of Latin America, it's a huge continent, actually. We always talk about that, like, because of how the map of the globe is generated, it looks smaller than North America. It's not, guys. Latin America is huge, like huge land size. The maps are misleading. So there's basically only cloud providers in East Coast Brazil for all of Latin America. So everyone who's playing in Latin America will be connected to Brazil. Now, like, there's some movements by like Google Cloud and Microsoft to also do something on the West Coast. But at the moment, everyone in Latin America plays in Brazil, pretty much. The play experience of someone who's in the south of Argentina would be vastly different than someone who's playing in Brazil. Or if you're in this unfortunate center of the Americas, in Central America, connectivity is generally really bad. Mm-hmm. And there's only so much gaming companies can do about it because the infrastructure is just not there. Mm-hmm. And that is why it's also like the same can be said in Europe and the Middle East. Now, Amazon last year just opened a site in Bahrain, in the Gulf region. Mm. But before that, there's nothing in Africa. South Africa and the Gulf region. The rest of Africa, biggest continent in the world, has no cloud structure. So technically very, very tricky to expand, to choose the right markets, who's playing with who. The monetization model, like, again, is one of these tricky things. If you want to combine markets, want to have them play with each other, then they basically need to have the same monetization. Else you're creating like an unfair environment, because potentially, depending on what you monetize, but one market has an advantage over another, which leads to fraud. Because then all of a sudden there's currency trading, there's people pretending to be in a market and they're in another, all of that. Really, really complex. Or you say we're monetizing the same everywhere on the planet, which is kind of our model. But then you're missing out on the opportunities of better monetization, more tailored to a specific market. But then, for example, like PUBG in India had no localized monetization. It was the same product like everywhere else. And it was the biggest game by far in India. So like, there's always the exception.
Yeah. It's amazing that even, there's no cookie cutter strategy for success on one topic, like how to monetize globally.
Yeah. So technical limitations, monetization, having a team on the ground, which understands the market.
Yep.
That's like
so key.
It's super key.
Yeah.
I think almost like the only reason why the world is not playing Chinese games today is that, well, Tencent has some teams on the ground. But like, if you actually go back 20 years, 10 years, 20 years, and look at Nintendo. Nintendo has Nintendo of America, right? They have Nintendo of Europe. That's all cool. But they're very driven by the headquarter in Japan. So these local entities, they're like, yeah, but there's mostly marketing and sales. They don't have so much input on the product.
Mm-hmm.
And so essentially everyone on the planet is playing the same version of the game.
Yeah.
And these games are not tailored for around the world. They're mainly focused on what they know and how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're like, Nintendo is possibly the best company in the world when it comes to game design and making them so human that wherever you are on the planet, you enjoy playing their games. And that's maybe their magic. But they are not a company which is like focused on localization a lot. And so getting that component right, and also like letting hanging your ego at the door when you enter a market,
Yeah.
and not believing that you know everything and that you know the market, and what got you successful in a market won't get you successful in another. That's so important.
Yeah, a difficult thing for HQ to do.
Giving up control.
Yeah,
it's giving up control.
That's so hard. Yeah, we've seen like so many, companies find trusted regional partners like Garena. We talked about having a lot of autonomy in the titles that they undertake. They also are operating multiple within the same genre in a region, which I think is really interesting. Tencent, of course, with everything that they're involved in, gets into similar situations. But like you said, a lot of product, the game decisions are made at that HQ level. And so the regional teams kind of have to operate within the bounds of what they're given, essentially. And then, also starting to become the case even more so with India, right? Especially with geopolitical tension. They're trying to make sure that there is local server and data storage within the country just to, ensure from a privacy perspective that things are handled the way that they prefer it to be. So really, really something that is got to be custom tailored based on each individual country and region that you're trying to enter into.
Like what you see happening in India today is the case in China for years. And of course, when we went through this whole stop of review and reorganization of how games are whitelisted for the Chinese market, the complexity to release a game in China as a Western company without a partner is insane. It's something really like to understand. And actually, if more countries are adopting to having very local regulations, the complexity will go up. So if India is doing that, right now, India is doing that when it comes to titles coming from China specifically, or but if more markets would opt to have very specific regulations in place, very specific needs in place, you need to work with a local entity. All of a sudden, things become so complex that actually only a few big players can pull that off. And a small publisher will just have to say, we cannot. We cannot do it because the complexity is too high. So it will hit the smaller guys harder than the big players.
Yeah.
It's something like I'm pretty concerned with actually on a high level. I mean, we are in the fortunate situation because we're so close with Tencent. Of course, for us, the Chinese market is pretty clear, and we have a team in Shanghai, and it's easy to operate in a market like that for us.
It is a Supercell entity. Am I understanding that correctly? In China?
Yeah, we have a Supercell office in China. We're developing also games in China. We started doing that a few years ago. Even working with Tencent and like having all the access to everything, it's still not a simple process. Like there's so many things to consider, so many things to take into consideration. The regulations in China to release a game are just like, it became harder, right, over the last 2 years. You just need to consider so many things. You need to have a way to verify the age of the player. So that is number one. And it needs to be a kind of a legitimized way of recognizing the age of a player, because you need to treat underage players differently than everyone else. And there's a little bit of a trend of that. I mean, with India, we hit a little bit already. Russia considered some of these things. Vietnam has regulations that you need to work with a partner. which is of course interesting. We're not operating in Vietnam anymore.
Mm.
And the reason is the complexity to do that. Having another entity there, it's very complex, another partner. And if you don't see this in the context of the opportunity, China, it's very clear for everyone what the opportunity is. Again, biggest games market on the planet. The opportunity is big. Vietnam, maybe not. I hope that it's not a huge trend, and that, like, as long as Europe agrees on something, for example, as a holistic unit, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
You can, and there's some regulations already, right? You have the GDPR. You need to be able to delete all your data. You need to have insights on all your data on demand. We've built these structures already, like, years ago, of course. So you can consider local things, but every time there's a country or an entity of countries which adds complexity, it just means there's less companies which can do that.
Yep.
It's pretty harsh.
Yeah, and even in addition to government regulations, like we've been discussing, there's a lot of even just market nuances and player-based nuances that make each region different. We talked already about kind of the speed of the content cycle that Eastern players are used to, because that's what their games are that they play, right? So if you come in as a Western publisher with a much slower model, your player base may churn. And, so that's also why I think we're seeing some of these games, especially ones like Free Fire that have, Garena as a publisher, come in with a style-based content system, really fast renewal of game modes and skins and players, characters, potentially have success because a region may not have been able to access that previously, right? And then making that accessible to the average person and their device type as well. This is the first time that a lot of players in Brazil, period, have played a battle royale, is through Free Fire. And then couple that with the skins and the content strategy. So lots of other nuances as well. And bringing it just to an esports topic to kind of, wrap up at least the points I wanted to hit, is that it makes it very challenging to make a product that is relevant for each of the audiences that you're trying to hit, right? Because we talked about how it's important to really nail it on the broadcast as far as, making it casual and, something that's going to appeal to the broader player base, right? Well, now you have to do that in English and in, Portuguese and in all these other languages. It just becomes increasingly complex to put out a product that's going to be consistent and land with your audience. So especially now that we're becoming a lot more of a globalized world, being able to have a strategy where you focus on broadcasts that are applicable to multiple countries and regions is going to end up having a nice ripple effect as well.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, Matt. The interesting component, and we touched on that in a different context a few times already, but there's a question of control. In the traditional model, game publishers are used to control the narrative of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the old marketing dogma, basically, from, okay, we as a company, we have a marketing team, and the marketing team tells the world what our product is. Over the last 10 years, we moved past that. And now we're in a world where you as a brand, you don't tell your consumers, your payers, your customers anymore what your stuff is. No, it's like that they define that.
Yeah.
And they is the community at large, which means the content creators, the local communities, each country differently. And like, I guess when we made the original launch plans for Brawl, Ryan Lighton, the original community manager for Brawl, and we talked a lot about that. But we were like, let's forget about control. Let's make this all about the community, and let's let the community have control, and let them define things. You see that? I give you a very simple example, actually, and it's like, if you go 20 years back, every game needed to have a forum, and game forums were like the most normal thing in the world. And you would go to the game forum of your game. So Blizzard had the World of Warcraft forums. Everyone had forums. We had forums for most of our games. It was just an expectation that there's a place where there's an exchange about your game. It's an official place. And in that place, at the end of the day, you as the publisher have the responsibility and the control to moderate content. So you can just remove things you don't like. You of course need to make sure that there's nothing inappropriate, that there's nothing unlawful going on. So you need to manage these spaces, and you're also responsible for the data of your users there. So it's very easy to get hacked and lose user data, as we all know. And today, we transition to a world where companies don't have a forum anymore. They have a Reddit. And actually, the best companies arguably have a Reddit they don't control. It's controlled by the community. And maybe there are some developers posting there, and they're recognized as developers and get their tags and all of that. But the control is with the community. So you cannot tell them, you cannot talk about this stuff here. It's the community's choice. So you lose control over your brand, literally. And this is just one tiny example actually in the bigger picture, but it's across the place. Brands have lost control over the brands. They might think they still have a glimpse of control, but it's actually not the case anymore. Players are communicating so many different ways: Discord, Reddit, you name it.
Different regionally too.
Different regionally, like huge difference per region. And the content creators, people are believing the content creators more than they believe a gaming magazine who's writing your review. So like you have many of these cases where gaming magazines had like almost paid reviews, right? And it's all gone. It's like it's completely gone. And I think there's some good mechanics behind that as well. Like if today you pay someone to write a review to your game, it needs to be an ad and stuff like that. But it's really, you lost control. It's again about loss of control. And I think that's a scheme we will see more and more emerging also on the business side of things. So empowering the community and helping you becoming a global game, I think that's where it's at, right? It's like you really want these insights. You want that they make the decisions. Again, example from Brawl Stars. There was this incident that Mortis, one of the characters, when we remodeled him very early on before going global, removed his head. In the remodeled version, he didn't have a head anymore. The community went berserk over this topic. Like a tiny little thing, because for them it was like, this character has a head. And we ended up actually doing the compromise. We gave him the head back and had the version without head for people who agreed with our artistic vision. But I think it's really, you need to just embrace the community and really like allow them to steer the game in the right direction. And I think that will serve companies well. Like you just have to embrace it. You just cannot do it half-assed. You really need to accept it and then roll with it. And if people tell you, hey guys, this feature here, that was really bad, then likely it was bad. Likely it was bad and it wasn't what the community expected. And then you have to ask yourself, hey, what went wrong?
I always tell publishers, if you really want to know what the state of a game is, talk to a content creator, because they're the ones that really have a pulse on it, because they personally rely on coming out with new content and things that are fresh for the viewers to watch. So they know what is available for them to create content around, but they're also the public sounding board for fans, right? That includes good stuff and not so good stuff. So content creators also read every single comment that they get, a lot of them. So they really do have a solid pulse on how games are trending, essentially. And interestingly, I think you touched on this as well. It's something that is a way that a game can regionalize, right? I talked about how Mobile Legends is signing these exclusivity agreements in Southeast Asia. Well, that's because that's their public-facing personas in the region in a lot of different ways, right? They're influencers. And so actually influencer marketing has been used as a really core tool for games to branch out into new regions, because you're working with these trusted celebrities that already have an established fan base that you can tap into. And that's also a really interesting case in Arabic speaking regions as well, because it can save the publisher a lot of time and effort to have to localize the game itself and the UI elements and translations, because that influencer can show a video where they just get into the gameplay and they show the actually amazing aspects that the viewers ought to know about, and they're going through it themselves. So you can skip the tutorial process and all of that. So it's really, it's definitely, I've seen influencer marketing, especially now, obviously in my role at AMG, but as an increasingly popular tool for games to kind of branch in between regions.
I guess when we, for example, when you discuss esports and you say, okay, like which languages for our Worlds event do we support?
Right.
Like, okay, how many languages can we support realistically? Where do we have the talent we know and we trust? Okay, so then you pick the most common things you want to pick. So you of course have English, you have Spanish, you have Brazilian Portuguese, you likely have German, French, maybe Italian, you have Russian, then you have Chinese, maybe Korean, maybe Japanese. And these are the main languages. And everything else is like, if you do support so many, actually, that is already a lot.
That's a lot.
But then afterwards, it's super easy to actually go broader, because you can just empower your community. I'm sure you know who's your biggest Bulgarian streamer who's streaming in Bulgarian about your game, even if you don't have it localized. So you trust this Bulgarian dude because he's producing good content. Why don't you ask him if he wants to stream the World Championships in Bulgarian? You provide him with a clean stream, you provide him with a UI, the overlay and everything. And all you ask is just use the official overlay and stream to your best abilities, but you can do whatever you want. It lives on your content channel. It's not our channels. So you just empower.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you can cover 25 languages, 50 languages.
What was the World Championship? It was either 13 or 17 languages, if I'm remembering correctly. It was a lot.
Something like that. Yeah. I think it's especially important if you're like, again, like we talked about Free Fire a lot. Free Fire could totally get away just streaming a World Championship in Indonesian and Brazilian today, because the audience in English is so small. Like, if you put English on top of that, then you're fine. But if your game is truly global and distributed everywhere, then it's just a better strategy to empower the community, give them co-hosting abilities, and all of a sudden you reach so many more people.
Yeah.
And I think that is like the magic also of all these creator programs you see popping up. And of course, like, I don't think many companies are doing this really well today.
Yep.
Again, because it's like this trust versus control issue. Because if you're really like, if it's down to trust, then you need to allow content creators to also say things about your product which you don't want to hear.
True. Yeah.
That is the only way of doing it, because trust only goes, like, it needs to be complete. And they have as much as they work with you, they also have a duty towards their audience. And if you want them to be believable, if you want them to be genuine, you need to allow them to say, I really don't like this feature. I see what the developers try to do here. They shouldn't vomit their feedback over the stuff, but they should be honest.
Yeah.
And if you think that is bad for your game, then you might shut it down, right? But then that has really hard repercussions, because all of a sudden all these other content creators believe that they cannot say what they think when they work with you. And so you're creating this echo chamber of nobody is actually telling you when something goes wrong.
Yeah. Feedback loop is completely broken.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's really like, yeah, I can, if anyone from any big publishers are watching this, build a creator program where you actually trust and empower the content creators, and don't be afraid of critical feedback. I'm not saying you should accept rudeness at all. I'm very intolerant when it comes to people being rude on social media, which is maybe maybe very old school from me, but I'm not the youngest guy anymore. But I am a firm believer in being, if someone is honest, genuine, gives constructive feedback, you need to listen.
Yeah.
And if you don't listen, you're just missing out on an opportunity to make your product better.
100%. I think this is actually a great topic for the next episode, is content creator
Cool.
programs and the role that they play. I've personally been, fortunate to advise on the creation of some of those programs as well. So would love to be able to do a dive in different structures and what they might look like, but particularly, how that's relevant for all the parties involved, and how the structure can impact the game and creators and the fans themselves. So definitely a really robust topic. But wow, what an episode. I think this is pretty good for, the first time hopping on call here and talking through these topics, but we were able to hit some really exciting stuff here.
Indeed.
Awesome. Well, I definitely had a lot of fun. I hope that the viewers at home did it as well, but we will definitely be coming back with more. I think we will make sure on these types of podcasts to, restrict the topics to things that are really impactful and high level, but then also practical, and things that, really the world ought to know, because there's so much going on in this industry, man. I tell you what.
Yeah, and if you have any topics you want us to cover, hit us up. We try to have that bird's eye view on things holistically. Mm-hmm. And so everything esports, everything gaming goes. But of course, our focus is scoot tightly towards esports on mobile, but we're also going bigger. So
yeah, I think there's a lot of learnings that can happen in a lot of different areas. So you never know what we'll end up covering. But absolutely, what an amazing episode 1, Frank. Always a pleasure, and I will see you back here for the next one.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Bye.